Okay, so we're going to continue our discussion about tropical disease. This time we're going to go through a sort of, who's who of bacteria that are important in tropical medicine. So bacteria are different from viruses, and they contain genetic information and much of the equipment necessary to produce energy and replicate independently. So in that respect, bacteria are not much different than ourselves. Some bacteria, however, can only reproduce when growing inside the cell, from which they derive nutrients. Bacteria of public health importance in developed countries are often the same bacteria that are of public health importance in developed countries, but risk for infection and severe disease can vary depending on a wide range of factors. And I really want you to think about what these factors could be and why context matters in terms of infectious disease. So the first one I want to talk about is cholera, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and we actually was part of the discussion last week. Cholera is a diarrheal disease caused by infection with Vibrio cholerae. It's mostly found in contaminated water and shellfish, and it produces a toxin that upsets the biochemical balance of cells lining the intestine and makes them secrete copious amounts of water and electrolytes. Cholera is characterized by severe watery diarrhea, which, if left untreated, can result in serious dehydration and death. Treatment consists of replacement of lost water, salts, and sugar. You can see there's a picture of cholera itself, of the bacterium, and then there's a picture of cholera as a devil, causing misery upon some local populations in Europe. And you can see there's a picture of a kid pulling dirty water out of what seems to be simply a drainage pool or some type of polluted creek. And this is why cholera exists: poor sanitation, poor water, lack of resources to be able to boil water and sterilize it. Cholera once existed all over the world. Now it only appears in certain places. Right now, the hotspot for cholera is Yemen. Due to the war there, really they're facing the largest cholera outbreak in probably human history. It's absolutely horrific. I have friends that are working there right now, and yeah, it's not a pretty sight for sure. So yeah, political instability, lack of access to clean water, social marginalization, all these things contribute to cholera outbreaks. And even, you can look on the map and sort of like, sort of ask yourself why cholera appears where it does. E. coli can produce toxins similar to those of cholera, causing illness ranging from traveler's diarrhea to persistent diarrhea associated malnutrition. An extremely pathogenic form of these bacteria is called O157, and is often associated with ingestion of undercooked meat, but it's also been found in other foods, including unpasteurized milk. There was a large outbreak of 0157 in Japan when I was there a couple decades ago. Many people got sick, so there are outbreaks in developed countries, in urban situations where theoretically this should not happen. You can see up in the top corner there's a map of the romaine lettuce outbreak from a few years back, and where lettuce went and how many people got sick. So this is definitely of tropical disease importance. I mean, you can see on the map down at the bottom where a number of deaths of children due to E. coli, and many of which are in developing countries for sure. So what I'm trying to, again, sort of impress upon you is that while these bacteria exist in developed countries, they present more severe outcomes in developing countries. And that's not simply due to biology. It's more environment, living conditions, that kind of thing. Typhoid fever, enteric disease. Some people think that typhoid is a lung disease. It's actually an enteric disease. It's caused by the bacterium Salmonella enterica, subspecies Enterica serovar. Symptoms may vary from mild to severe and usually begin 6 to 30 days after exposure. Gradual onset of fever over the course of several days. Often people don't really know what's going on when it started. It just sort of gradually builds up. Commonly accompanied by weakness, abdominal pain, constipation, headaches, and mild vomiting. Severe cases are associated with confusion. Typhoid is spread by eating and drinking food that's contaminated. Risk factors include poor sanitation and poor hygiene, the same sort of set of risk factors that come with Hep A. Diagnosis is either by culturing the bacteria or detecting the DNA in blood, stool, or bone marrow. It's somewhat difficult to culture typhoid. So bone marrow is actually the sort of sample of choice to diagnose from. But treatment for typhoid is quite simple in mild cases, and many health facilities in developing countries simply will suspect typhoid and just simply provide antibiotics right there. Typhoid fever worldwide, again, you can see developing world. Sub-Saharan Africa, sort of skeptical about that light color of Tanzania. I'm not sure what to think of that. But you can see it's all over the developing world, a little bit in South America, India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran. Tuberculosis, which we're going to have a whole session on in a couple weeks. Caused primarily by the bacterium, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Infection can last a lifetime, resulting in disease that to virtually every organ in the body, but primarily affecting the lungs. It's an opportunistic infection of HIV. See HIV tuberculosis co-infections frequently. It's a major problem in developing countries. Not unheard of in developed countries. Russia has a serious problem with tuberculosis in prisons. Japan has a problem with tuberculosis in slum areas, specifically in Osaka and the Nishinari ward. I've been down there and been on trucks that do work with tuberculosis cases there. So it's not unheard of in developed countries, but it's highly prevalent in developing countries for sure. Lengthy treatment and increasing development of drug resistance by the bacteria due to lack of compliance with the lengthy treatment regimens. Multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, MDR, TB, it's TB that does not respond to at least isoniazid and rifampicin, the two most powerful anti-TB drugs. Multi-drug resistance continues to emerge and spread due to mismanagement of TB treatment and person transmission. Most people with TB are cured by a strictly followed 6-month drug regimen that is provided to patients with support and supervision, which isn't all that easy to do, particularly in resource-poor areas, and particularly since drugs cost money, for sure, to individuals and to health systems. And this can be compromise effective treatment for bacterial diseases like this that require extremely lengthy treatment regimens. Tuberculosis worldwide, here it is, developing countries for sure, but you can see Russia's up there for sure, Brazil as well. Hansen's disease, leprosy, which you've all heard of. Here is an unfortunate gentleman who has leprosy. It's caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae, which is related to the agent that causes tuberculosis. Exact mechanism of transmission from person to person is somewhat unknown, but likely involves contact with infected skin or nasal secretions. Bacteria grow mainly in tissue cells known as macrophages in the skin and Schwann cells in the surrounding nerves. Clinical outcome is extremely variable. Some infected individuals remain without symptoms in its worst form. It's uncontrolled, leading to loss of sensation and an eventual loss of extremities. Treatment relies on a long-term administration of antibiotics. It can take up to 2 years. And again, this is a real problem to make sure that people have the antibiotics and are taking them for that long. Treatment. Okay, worldwide, India, Brazil, then developing countries overall. Some cases here in the U.S., I'm not sure what that's about or where those come from, but definitely down in New Guinea and that area down there in Southeast Asia. Q fever, brucella. Wrote a paper on Q fever and brucella a few years ago. Q fever is a disease caused by the bacteria Coxiella burnetii. Brucellosis is caused by several species of the genus Brucella. Brucella and Q fever both mainly infect cattle, livestock. It's not unheard of to have infected bison, for example, and the worry of transmission between bison and cattle here in the United States. There was a Q fever outbreak among goats in the Netherlands a few years ago. People can get infected by breathing in dust that has been contaminated by infected animal feces, urine, milk, and birth products. It's extremely transmissible. Contact with one single bacterium will result in infection. And there's multiple routes. It can be sort of nasal secretions, aerosolized fecal matter, urine, milk, semen, anything, really. Contact with meat, anything. Some people never get sick. Most cases resolve themselves in short order, but a few go on to become chronic and can lead to endocarditis and arthritis in many cases. And it's sort of unknown what the prevalence of Q fever, chronic Q fever, and brucella is in the world, because it mainly occurs amongst pastoralists, for example, in Kenya, who do not really have connections with the health system. Diagnostics for Q fever are difficult, often rely on ELISA screens, which are not available to most places. Most of your local health clinics in a pastoralist area won't have access to the lab facilities required to conduct such a test, so cases go missed. Yeah, brucella worldwide. See, it's all over the place, really. Basically anywhere you have cattle, livestock, or any sort of large wildlife of any kind will have it. Human cases, of course, are somewhat rare in most places. In developing countries, that's a little bit different, especially among pastoralists. So discussion questions, food for thought. Every disease we have presented here is treatable and preventable. Why are these diseases more common in developing countries than in developed countries? What specific factors might lead to high incidence in developing countries? And how do you think these issues might be resolved? So what I want you to do is think about those things, especially as we're going on in the course. I want to take a sort of holistic view of what infectious disease is. It's not just simply bad luck. There's specific conditions that lead to risk, increase or decreased risk among people. There is no infectious disease out there that maintains transmission by accident. There's definitely accidental occurrences from animals to humans, but maintaining transmission is not an accident, for sure. So think about those things as you're moving along, and we're going to move on to parasites.